My name is Carlton Turner. I'm the executive director of Alternate Roots in Atlanta, Georgia. And I'm also the co-artistic director and co-founder of Mugabe, Men Under Guidance Acting Before Early Extinction, which is based in Raymond, Mississippi. My work is on the front lines of cultural transformation. Basically, I've looked at the movements as I've been introduced to them as being a student and the next generation behind the civil rights movement, and understanding that the movement and the work that we're trying to do collectively, no matter what front you're working on, is about cultural transformation. Whether you're working on LGBT issues, whether you're working on economic issues or housing issues, whatever the issue is that you're dealing with, it's about shifting the culture of this country and shifting the culture of the way that our communities work. And so that's where I work. I work at that front line of cultural transformation. So I think the forces that are So the forces that I think that are working to create crisis in my community, both those that are visible and invisible, include and at the root of them are imperialism, and looking at the 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 consistent occupation of land and the way that indigenous people and those that have been occupying indigenous spaces have been rendered invisible. I think that's the primary foundational issue that we're dealing with. What has been piled on top of that is this capitalist structure that monetizes every aspect of life, and every aspect of our livelihood. So you can't have a decent quality of life if you can't pay for the services that should be a number of them, and the majority of them should be basic human rights: water, having shelter, having clothes, having food. These are basic human rights and should not be part of, you shouldn't have to pay to live, And so thinking back to generations that existed before us that were more independent, especially in rural communities like where I come from, where people were able to sustain themselves on the land and they were able to live in a way that was, consistent with their environment and in harmony with their environment. And that has been totally shifted. And people that I know, that I remember growing up, that were very wealthy in terms of their quality of life, but were considered poor by the standards of society because they didn't have material things or finances. And so that's a big issue, I think. I would say the second part of that is, and I think that's very predatory. The way that capitalism works and design structures is very predatory. And it takes advantage of people who don't understand capitalist and economic systems. And so, thinking about education, I think another huge crisis. The education in our communities does not lend towards developing critical thinkers. So the ability to analyze a situation and be able to respond to that situation is almost non-existent. And so the generations, as they are, dismantling public education, and what Bob Moses called sharecropper education, it is providing an inadequate education for our young people to be able to envision a different future, so that all they can do is inherit this piece of a future that been given from a generation that is more inclined to go towards material possessions and greed than they are towards building structures that are sustainable and about supporting the larger framework of community. To me, liberation looks like having access to information, using that information to develop a critical discourse amongst your peers and multiple generations, and then making decisions based on sound information and a healthy engagement of critical discourse. To me, that is the pathway to liberation, is that we can have the information to understand where we are at the moment, to be able to build the type of systems that allow us to critique the systems and critique each other and critique our solutions, and then, as a group collectively move towards those things that we feel are in the best interest of the collective humanity. And to me, that's what that's what liberation looks like to me. And I would say what should be a defining factor is whether or not we're creating healthy, holistic, safe communities. And those should be the decisions that we make should be based on moving towards more healthy, more safe, and more holistic communities.
I should say why. I'm sorry.
I'm committed. I'm committed to the Southern Movement Assembly process because I feel that this work is not any one organization's work. It's not any one community's work. It's not any one front's work. It takes a collective analysis and a collective process to work together and build the type of structures and the type of resistance that is needed in order for us to be able to create the space needed for generations to plan for creating different futures. So that space that is needed, I think the Southern Movement Assembly is really about creating an opportunity for many people from many diverse places to come together to have conversations about how can we best support each other on the multiple struggles that we're working on, and what are the common threads that we can pull from those struggles that allow us to work on pieces that are about uniting us and about solidarity, but also recognize that none of us have the answers independently, and we all can lend something towards each other's on smaller engagement in terms of the struggle, and that collectively, all of us working together to help support each other on the local front, on the regional front, will strengthen us as a movement. It is about movement building. It's not about any one group of people. And so I think the Southern Movement Assembly offers the best possibility for that to happen with integrity, with a clear analysis, and with a generation of younger leaders that are really focused on building and stretching the gap between the civil rights generation and what they call the millennials, and making sure that there's some consistency and coherency in how that movement has evolved over time.
Solid. Is there anything else you want to plug in terms of this moment? A separate cutout for Alternate Roots, promo, anything? The annual's coming up. Is there anything you want to say in this last spot?
Wow, it's a lot.
Freedom Summer.
Yeah, this is a big time. This is the moment that we're commemorating Freedom Summer. 50 years of a strategy, 50 years past a strategy to help educate and help liberate Mississippians and get them to the right to vote, get them to the place in which they can exercise that right that they already had, and recognizing the sacrifices that it took to get to that milestone, and so it offers us a new opportunity to use this moment as an opportunity to put a lens of how that strategy was devised and how it was implemented, and the types of environmental factors that existed at that moment, and juxtapose that against where we are at this moment, with mass surveillance, big data, mass incarceration. We're seeing our comrades and friends be targeted, to basically take down. It's very much a lot of the same that existed in those days is being re-envisioned and reformed on steroids. And so how do we use this moment to both take a peek at where we have been collectively as a movement, and how we can use that knowledge to formulate the type of strategies that we need in this moment. And that's very important. And Mississippi has always been at the center of movement building in the South. And I think that saying, as the South goes, so goes the nation, rings just as true today as it ever did, with the killing of young black men, Trayvon Martin and Jordan Davis, in Florida, and just this hyper conservative push to take back and to negate a lot of the progress that has been made nationally. That this moment it should be not just a moment to commemorate the 50th anniversary of Freedom Summer, but a moment to reinvigorate the masses and the collective people around these issues that continue to persist and now have elevated to another level. So thinking about alternate roots, and in a couple of years we're going to be turning 40, and our organization is trying to understand that similar moment. What were the circumstances around the country, specifically in the South, that lend itself to the forming of our organization, and what are the circumstances now as we turn 40? How have we matured? How are we addressing those issues? How are we? What are we doing now that's different from what we were doing then? Has the vision shifted? Has the vision changed? Do the strategies need to shift and change? Are we being effective in having? Have we actually gained any ground in those 40 years? So I think it's these moments that allow us a time to reflect and actually evaluate the effectiveness of our movement building practices and the effectiveness of our institutions. And I think this is it's very important for us to call our institutions to the table and say, hey, you've been around for 50 years, you've been around for 40 years. What is it that you set out to do, and what's different now that what actual progress have we made? And it's not a way of dehumanizing or devaluing the work that has been done, but it's like recognizing that we're in a different moment right now, and we've got to double down and understand exactly what's going to work, and if are we taking the right risks? Are we taking enough risks? And so those are a lot of things that I'm thinking about, as the 50th anniversary of the Freedom Summer is coming, that we're at it right now, and as we move into celebrating 40 years of alternate roots.
Perfect.
Awesome.
What spot? You ready?
My name is Carlton Turner. I'm the Executive Director of Alternate Roots based in Atlanta, Georgia, which is a 38-year-old service organization that works with artists that are doing work in Southern communities around social justice issues. I'm also the co-artistic director and co-founder, along with my brother Maurice Turner, of Mugabe, Men Under Guidance Acting Before Early Extinction, and it's based out of Raymond, Mississippi.
Forces, invisible forces?
Yeah, I would say that invisible forces that are visible and invisible, that are praying and creating crisis in my community, are all stemmed in imperialism and capitalism, the monetization of every aspect of our lives. We're paying to live, which is counterintuitive to the human experience. We're the only species on the planet that has to pay to live on this rock. And so, recognizing that, we're making decisions that are not based in what I would think is a real civilization. I think another one of those invisible forces are So I think another invisible force in my community is the deconstruction of the education system, and the fact that we're not developing young people to be critical thinkers and critical minds, and that is affecting their ability to think outside the box and to change their circumstances.
Perfect.
To me, liberation looks like having sound information, across the spectrum, having a place and a space for critical discourse about the work that we do, and the ability for us to build consensus and make decisions that are in the best interest of our livelihood and moving towards safer and more holistic, healthy communities.
What does the struggle look like beyond liberation?
I think the struggle beyond liberation looks like people in charge of their own lives, and people being supported in the ways in which they have deficits. So in Mississippi, for example, one of the big issues is health. Our children are obese, our old people are obese, they're high blood pressure, diabetes. You juxtapose that with the fact that Mississippi has the most fertile land in the United States, and we can grow anything from cotton to corn to vegetables, everything that you want. We can grow those things organically and safe, in a way that doesn't, fill into the standards of GMOs or Monsanto. What is that disconnection between the land and the health? What is that relationship? What are the things that are making that relationship dysfunctional? And how do we begin to address some of those things? So teaching young people to to value the land and understand their relationship to it, so that they can be in charge of their own health, and that the money it saves, the pressure taken off the health care industry, all of these things are all benefits that we have that will be long term.
I was going to jump into that conversation. The last piece on the assembly and the movement.
I'm committed to the Southern Movement Assembly because I think, as a young person, as a younger leader coming into this work, that it offers the best opportunity to do cross-platform movement building with diverse young people that don't have all of the same prejudices. Of course, we have some of the prejudice because we're Americans, you know, and that comes with a certain level of dysfunction. But I think we also recognize that this is an urgent moment, and that there's a reason for us and a time for us to be building allies across class, across ethnicity, across race, across educational and economic forces, that, you know, this is that moment. And it's always that moment, you know, but this is the organization and the type of practices that I think could actually move us to another plateau in this movement building.
Spot on. I think that's a great spot.
Okay, just hold still for a second.
Like a hand shot too. Perfect. Sport on food sovereignty and crime reduction, right? You know, here in New Orleans, just knowing the statistics, if you ask someone, why do people shoot each other? Why do black men shoot each other in New Orleans? They'll tell you drugs. They'll tell you guns. When you look at the statistics, it's neither drugs or guns. Neither do these guys have gun arrests or homicide arrests, right? So why are they shooting each other? A lot of it is misunderstandings, miscommunications at the very basis of it here, and I presume other places. Then when you talk about why the young man who was shot during the same time we were doing the march to Sanford, in the French Quarter, he was shot from jumping a guy's fence 3 o'clock in the morning. Kid, what's he doing jumping the fence 3 o'clock in the morning? He's trying to jump the fence to steal something, to fence for some food. They literally go to sleep every night in this city with no food. And the city is culturally rich in food and money.
And it makes an international living about food.
Absolutely.
So I was just with Carol Bebel yesterday, and we were talking, and she showed me this map of basically of New Orleans, and all of it was about the lead deposits, and the connection between the lead deposits and the violence.
Yes.
These communities with violence, and you know, it's a lot of these pieces we should be drawing and making, you know, part of our collective analysis about what the real issue is in these communities. You know, drugs, okay, that's an easy one actually. You know what I'm saying? Because these folks ain't going out, they ain't making cocaine and marijuana in the French Quarter. You know, and these different places in Gentilly and wherever in New Orleans, they're not making that stuff. So that's not a homegrown problem.
Right. Our mayor here likes to say, he likes to call the homicide or genocide that happens in New Orleans unnatural. And I always tell him what's unnatural in New Orleans. It's not that we have poor people, it's that we have poverty. It should not exist here the way it does, in the pockets that it does. 4 blocks from St. Charles, the wealthiest area in America.
Houses in the country.
In America. 4 blocks away, the absolute poorest place in America. Right there in Central City, right? And so when you look at map out the food deserts, and lay over the hard to count communities from the census,
That's right.
and lay out all of the other places where we're losing and land and everything else, it's the same thing, right? And this is where the crime is happening. This is where the poverty is, right? We eradicate poverty, we'll see crime and all this other stuff literally go away,
That's right.
vanish overnight.
Tonight.
Thank you so much, my brother.
Oh man,
I
it's great to
appreciate
see
it.
you, man.
And I think I'm gonna have this ready by Tuesday.
Okay. Oh wow.
And some of the profiles are already up.
Yeah. And that's on the which site is that on?
It's on the south site.
Okay.
It's not officially launched yet.
Okay, gotcha.
We built the site on Wix, and now we need to point the site to the old address,
Gotcha,
right? And
gotcha.
once we do that, we'll launch, right? And so I think next week we'll officially blast out the new site, and you'll have the video profile. So I myself and a few other folks need to sit for interviews, and I think we'll have a good
what's
number
up,
of
man.
folks to have a reflection of the region.
Do your thing,
So,
brother. Do your thing.
yes,
man.
yes,
I'll
man.
be
We-
in touch with you, man.
I'm gonna let you run the Ashe.
Yeah, man.
And,
Another meet.
Absolutely. I got a lunch schedule with Carol. We try to meet like at least once a month
Yeah.
and steal ideas from each other.
Yeah. She's loaded with them, man. She is loaded.
And she has the money to move on.
She is loaded.
But no, man, she's good, and they're like very busy over there. We couldn't find a corner.
Oh yeah. I'm actually not going out. I'm actually going to the little Mexican restaurant across the street.
Okay.
Meeting with I don't know if you remember Jess Gars, but she used to work here at NPM, but now she's a program officer at the Cernan Foundation. So
Cool.
yeah.
Let's let him out so he can get to his 12. Was it 5 o'clock?
Yeah.
Okay, can pull a couple more shots in this office? Or this is
Yeah.
really
Let's
your
let him.
office?
Let's let